You're good to go. Okay. All right. So welcome to our annual inter-class civics debate. Second period, we're going to be hearing three debates. One on corporate personhood, another one on the death penalty, and the final one on abortion. So first up today, we're going to have our debate on corporate personhood, and just a couple rules and thoughts about being an audience, and just to explain the format of the debate. Please hold your applause till the end of the entire debate. That's one important thing. Number two, if you are a civics student, make sure you are scoring each debate. Okay? Number three, and this is for the debaters, I will be giving you guys time signals. I'll give you 30 seconds verbally, and then I'll say 10 seconds. If you guys go over, and you go really far over, I'll stop you. If you go a little bit over, I'll give time to the other side. Okay? Any questions from the debate teams or the audience? Each debate lasts about 20 minutes, more or less. If you are in the audience and you absolutely need to leave for some emergency in the middle of a debate, do so quietly without distracting. And if you need to get up and move around between debates, do so, but make sure you're back and seated as the debates start. Okay, without further ado, the first debate resolution reads, corporations have the same legal protections and rights as human people.
Start anytime?
Yeah.
Corporate personhood has been a debate involving people, corporations, and courts for centuries. I'm here to talk to you all about why a perfect world would entail all corporations having the same rights as any other person. Ever since the creation of corporations, they started with no basic rights. They were outcasts from the law. They had nothing protecting them. This always confused me, because how can the Constitution say any citizen has all these basic rights, but when it comes to corporations, which all it is just a group of citizens, have nothing? There is one good thing. Over the years since their creation, there has been numerous Supreme Court issues regarding the rights of a corporation, and many of which have benefited these corporations, giving us some rights that are either identical or slightly off than those of citizens. The biggest issue arises when it comes to corporations not having rights, is that the corporations can't flourish to their fullest potential. It is being chained down by not having these basic rights. These corporations, if flourished, could use their resources to help the public and improve the quality of lives around them. Corporations are just people, and they need to have the same rights as people.
The 14th Amendment states the following: all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The pressing question today is whether corporations should have the same legal protections and rights as human people. Based on previous Supreme Court rulings, the 14th Amendment applies to corporations that employ hundreds of thousands of people. Despite the amendment referencing human individuals, the courts have decided to disregard the intended meaning. Past decisions to grant corporations the rights of citizens have been scrutinized by Supreme Court justices. Their opinions, along with constitutional references, support our reasoning. A person is defined as a human being regarded as an individual. A corporation is defined as a human group recognized as a single entity. Despite the similarities in definition, there are basic differences. While a person can be directly liable for their actions, a corporation was made to keep liability away from the investors and owners. While people have moral compasses and basic compassion, corporations are cruel, cold, and unfeeling. If we, the people of the United States, continue to be stagnant with the court's decision, our rights will continue to be hampered, and our voices and presence in a representative democracy will fail. The first landmark case involving corporate personhood, Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific, was full of questionable legal arguments, misinformation, and deception. invalidating the Supreme Court's final decision. Their decisions need to be reevaluated by less corrupt individuals to ensure a fair ruling and a properly established precedent. We are here to tell you why corporate personhood is not justified and how it abuses the rights originally granted to human people and botches the idea of the people.
As a corporation, we are given few rights that are equal to those of the person, but we deserve more. Throughout many years, case after case after case again, we have been tried to be held down. There have been many cases regarding people and a corporation, but only a handful of these cases have reached the Supreme Court, where a majority of these cases has ended up in favor of corporations agreeing that they deserve these rights. The first case that I will bring up occurred in 1975. This happened in the Burger Court. This is the Virginia Citizens Consumer Council versus Virginia State Board of Pharmacy case. The Consumer Council challenged the Board of Pharmacy after seeing advertisements from the pharmacy where they'd advertise the price of the prescription drugs they were selling. They argued how it was unprofessional to advertise these prices that they were selling, the prices of the drugs they were selling. The Supreme Court was quick to decide in favor of the Board of Pharmacy in Board of the Pharmacy 7-1, saying it was the right of freedom of speech in advertising. Now, from a corporation stand of view, this conclusion of the case was really good. The one flaw of this conclusion was saying that we had freedom of speech in advertising, but that's not what we want. We want freedom of speech anywhere. Another example of the Supreme Court case siding with corporations was in 1886 at the Wake course. Personally, I disagree with what Niz said. This court case was between the Southern Pacific Railroads and Santa Clara County, and this was argued to the court when the railroad refused to pay their taxes because of misvalued property, caused by these fences around the rail tracks that the railroad company set up to prevent animals from running on the tracks. During this court sessions, the court says, and I quote, "The court does not wish to hear argument on the question whether the provision in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution which forbids a state to deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws applied to these corporations. We are all of the opinion that it does." This quote from the court directly states that this quote from the court directly states how one of the most basic rights as a citizen has, a corporation should as well. Not only should corporations have rights because of these cases, but also that the fact that a corporation, all it is a group of people who have all their own individual rights. So I ask you, why would an individual citizen get all their basic rights, but when they are grouped together, they as a whole lose those rights? Taking the rights from a corporation because they're a group of people labeled as their corporation could be similarly seen as taking the rights of a religious group because they're a group of people labeled by their beliefs.
Opposition.
Corporate personhood results in an unbalanced presence in U.S. politics. The level playing field of our voices and votes is eradicated. In Citizens United versus Federal Election Committee, Supreme Court Justice John Stevens wrote the dissenting opinion case on this. The resulting precedent was that corporations could have an unlimited political expenditure. Any election could get an unlimited amount of money donated to it. Quote, "The court's opinion is a rejection of the American people's common sense to prevent corporations from undermining self-government. It is a strange time to repudiate it." Unquote. Thanks to Citizens United, unlimited political expenditure is now free speech. This is concerning due to no limits on said expenditures. The voices and votes of human electors are effectively overridden. It is improbable, yet not impossible, for a corporation to buy out an election. Corporate political expenditures are decided by greed. Expenditures should indeed be limited. There is only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources to engage in open and free competition without fraud or deception. Milton Friedman once said that in the mid-1980s. Milton Friedman was a Nobel Prize-winning economist. Although there is one exception to this. In the 1971 case, U.S. versus New York Times, when the Nixon administration blocked the New York Times and Washington Post from releasing what we now know are the Pentagon Papers, the Supreme Court sided with the newspaper corporations, citing that it was their freedom, that they were exercising their First Amendment rights to publish those documents. They effectively brought down Richard Nixon. Citizens United versus FEC verdict has not been welcomed completely, however. In the 2018 midterms, the people of the great state of Massachusetts voted to set up a committee to introduce an amendment to grant rights to human citizens only. The Supreme Court has also granted religious rights in the past to corporations. In 2014, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the dissenting opinion for Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, where a chain store sued for having to provide contraception against their religious beliefs. Quote, "Any decision to use contraception is the woman's autonomous choice. Approving some religious claims while rejecting others can be perceived as favoring one over the other. The court, I fear, has ventured into a minefield," unquote. The president of Hobby Lobby established assertion of corporate religious rights. This is not justified. Only in uncommon scenarios will one's personal beliefs need to interact with their employer. Beliefs vary. Setting up clashes with various religious beliefs are inevitable. As 2020 approaches, we the people need to tell the candidates what needs to be addressed. It seems like corporate personhood is a viable option. As this issue evolves,
30 seconds.
We have to wonder, what is yet to come due to Citizens United? Why is it necessary to grant rights to human groups that speak by spending billions of dollars?
Affirmative. You guys have 2 minutes for arguments and rebuttal.
Start.
All right. So why would a corporate donating be bad? Like, just after all is just a group of people. So like a rich person could donate money too. Like they put in just as much. So why shouldn't a group of people be allowed to donate?
You say corporations, person's belief are interfering. Well, that is just one example that you use, and that is not with all cases with corporations.
All right, so if we take away rights from corporations, like what does that open the window to? I don't know. Couldn't that give cops no warrants to barge in whenever they want? Is that not taking away their own freedoms? Like,
we're just going to concede on this part. We have nothing to say.
Okay. Opposition, you guys have 2 minutes for arguments and rebuttal.
The opposition stated that there is no problem with corporations having unlimited expenditure in corporate and elections, but there is a problem. Most workers for the corporations will not have that same political view, and they're making money for that giant corporation. They're basically spending their money for their opposite beliefs. The claim corporations are people poses a biological dilemma due to the lack of biological mechanics and capacity for human traits such as personality, morals, and emotions. Moreover, they cannot die. A human person has a limited tenure on planet Earth due to biological constraints. A corporation can potentially live forever due to its ideas and objectives being passed down to the next generation of corporate tycoons. In the early years of corporate America, corporations were legally required to renew their license, granting them the ability to do business within the U.S. Infinite granting of privileges disqualifies corporations as people. Human people are responsible for their actions. This grants humanity. We must ask, why are fair, accurate definitions for people and corporations both literally and politically? And why grant groups of people the rights of one? These questions have been answered. We have given you the answers. For our democracy's sake, corporations cannot be treated as people. The precedent needs to change, as it did with Roe versus Wade, Reed versus Reed, and Brown versus the Board of Education. If the law is unjust or unconstitutional, the law will change. For our sake, it needs to.
Closing statements. You have 1 minute.
When you say corporations are not born into this world, they actually are. The person who signs the papers legalizes the corporations. With that, they give their beliefs into the corporations, their human beliefs. And that certificate, that paper that signs it, is the birth certificate. The corporation grows and leads in the right direction, similar to a parent. So remember, corporations are just labeled by a name. They deserve rights, just like the individual person. It does not make sense to take away rights to bigger groups of people. There has been many court cases siding with corporations because those people who we elect truly do see how they are humans and they deserve rights. Corporations don't just deserve a few rights like people. They deserve every single right people have. Just because there's more of us acting together as one does not mean we should be limited in our rights. This is not just an ethical debate, but a constitutional one. We can no longer deny rights to citizens of the United States, no matter what form they are in.
Thank you. Closing statement.
Hi. The relatively new proceedings to speak with money and wield religious rights grants corporations unfettered power. They could, in theory, buy candidates' way into office and can tell their employees what they can and cannot do regarding their religious beliefs. Moreover, corporations are literally not people. They live forever. They consist of thousands of people and have no liability, no soul, no moral compass, no expiration date. They don't grant a free society. What kind of country will we grow up in? One that serves the interest of human people, or the corporations that pump money into the system in order to sustain their greedy and potentially nefarious agendas? Now it's our turn. It's time for us to decide if our government will regulate corporations or regulate people. Thank you very much. Yeah, good job.
All right, red total for the bond. Scoring. All right. We can get everybody to settle down, please. We're going to move on to our next topic that you should not bring up at your first date. And the next topic reads as follows. A national ban on the death penalty, like Washington State's recent ban of the death penalty, is both constitutionally and morally correct.
Hello, everyone. We are here today representing the need to abolish the death penalty, or capital punishment. We believe that it is not only important, but essential that this inhumane punishment is no longer part of the United States government. The death penalty does not allow for the criminal to live with what they have done, but instead gives them an easy way out. There is also no chance for them to atone for their wrongdoing if they are already dead. In the past, execution methods included hanging, firing squad, gas chamber, and electrocution, all terrible ways to die. And all of these methods were very painful. The lethal injection is indeed less painful than previous methods, yet injections are often performed by inexperienced technicians. And if a member of the execution team injects the drug into a muscle instead of a vein, or if the needle becomes clogged, extreme pain will result. Such a painful and sloppy execution is undeniably cruel and unusual, and therefore unconstitutional, violating the Eighth Amendment. This violation of the Eighth Amendment is also quite hypocritical. The death penalty is paradoxical in nature because through it we are performing and promoting one of the actions we seek to prevent. Making an example of killing those who kill does not demonstrate peace or justice, just as two wrongs do not make a right. It is no person's or entity's place to sentence someone to death. The Fifth Amendment states, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." The opposing side claims it is constitutional for the court to decide whether the death penalty is necessary, as long as that due process of law is followed. The problem is that there is no guarantee whatsoever that due process can or will be followed properly in any such case. And if death results despite failure of due process, then that is an unconstitutional death. Since such a process can never be 100% assured, then resulting deaths can never be constitutional. Such a severe system cannot afford to be flawed, and if instant deaths result, then such a process should not be tolerable.
You got 10 seconds, go for it.
Hello. Capital punishment, otherwise known as the death penalty, is the highest punishment a criminal can receive. It is given to those who have committed capital crimes such as murder, terrorism, or espionage. Recently, Washington State has banned the death penalty and with more states leaning towards banning it, a national ban is becoming more probable. The death penalty has always been around for centuries and has always been a controversial punishment because people think that it would be more beneficial to our society if it was not around. However, it is a necessary part of our judicial system. Not only does it create a warning for criminals, it allows them to receive a punishment that they very well may deserve. Lethal injection is the most common case for the death penalty, or the most common punishment for the death penalty. This causes the criminal to go unconscious, stop their breathing, and cause a heart arrhythmia in this order. The criminals will fall unconscious before they even feel the effects of the injection. After its development in the U.S., other countries have also made lethal injection a legal method of execution. I agree that some of the methods of delivering the death penalty were once considered inhumane, but as time advances, so does the death penalty. It has gone through many changes to make it quicker and less dramatic. While you could argue that it goes against the Eighth Amendment, that argument does not have any structure. Killing someone might be cruel and unusual, but the alternative for abolishing the death penalty is life in prison, which is definitely also cruel and unusual. There should not be any thought put into a punishment less than life in prison for an alternative to the death penalty, because that does not create a strong consequence to intimidate wrongdoers. The death penalty is a tool that is used to hold every American accountable for their actions. Former President Ronald Reagan said, "We must reject the idea that every time a law is broken, society is guilty rather than the lawbreaker. It is time to restore the American precedent that each individual is accountable for their actions." So I believe that the death penalty is the national ban is unnecessary.
All right. The opposing brought up the death penalty in other countries, but we were solely focusing on the death penalty in the United States. We would like to start off by bringing your attention to a Supreme Court case in which the criminal was not pronounced dead after an attempt to execute him in an electric chair. The Supreme Court was asked to try a second attempt to kill him. The court held that re-executing Francis did not constitute double jeopardy or cruel and unusual punishment. The justices who opposed the ruling stated that, what is to separate a second attempt from a third, fourth, or fifth? This is a very important question to raise because in situations like these, where do we draw the line? Are we just allowed to make as many attempts as necessary regardless of how painful the execution is until the criminal is dead? Supreme Court case number 2. Another Supreme Court case involving William Wayne Thompson, a 15-year-old, murdered his sister's husband, Charles Keene. The Supreme Court ruled that the capital punishment for crimes committed at 15 years old or less is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court takes mercy on 15-year-olds, but not a child who is 1 year older. How is that fair to children who are 16 or 17? How is that system not flawed? We understand that the legal system is incredibly flawed in itself, but no other punishment exists that cannot be reversed, like the capital punishment. We do not believe that those who commit heinous crimes are undeserving of great punishment, but solely that the death penalty is not an appropriate method of punishment. Life sentencing is arguably more of a punishment because it is not such a gray area and gives the guilty a lifetime to consider their wrongdoings. The death penalty violates the cruel and unusual clause of the Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment states that no human shall be subject to cruel and unusual punishment. How does denying a human the right to life not constitute as cruel and unusual? Every human has the right to life, regardless of their crimes, and even if that life is spent in jail. The opposing also said that they think that never mind. Also, we wanted to ask if we're not breaking the 14th Amendment with the death penalty, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property, because it's depriving people of life.
Without due process, which should not necessarily be followed. Another common argument our opposing side of my state is that the death penalty is much more cost efficient than execution is much more cost efficient than putting them for a lifetime in prison. But this is actually false. The margin of cost between the two is rather shocking, And the death penalty costs almost double because the court cases, they tend to go on for so long, and they try to make sure that they actually are deserving of this crime, and it ends up costing much more than a lifetime in prison, which is much more ethical. Also, this form of punishment is ethically unjust and does not represent equality. Those who are economically stable are much less likely to receive the capital punishment, and those of color are much more likely to receive it than those who are white. In no way does the death penalty demonstrate equality or justice. The death penalty is expensive and irreversible, and a method that should be abolished.
The Eighth Amendment states excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. The death penalty was not originally. The death penalty wasn't a perfect system originally. It was unorganized and discriminatory. In 1972, during the Furman versus Georgia case, the death penalty was questioned. William Furman was burglarizing a home when someone spotted him. While he was fleeing, he tripped and accidentally shot off his firearm, killing the witness, leading to his death sentence. Since he didn't deliberately kill anyone, he claimed the death penalty would be a cruel and unusual punishment in this case. While this alone was not enough to sway the court, him claiming the death penalty would be a cruel and unusual punishment conflicted the judges. The Supreme Court banned the death penalty for 4 years so states could fix their laws and determine what makes a crime cruel and unusual. During this time, they were able to establish 4 principles that would determine whether a crime is cruel or unusual. Is it degrading human dignity? Is it arbitrary? Is it rejected throughout society? And is it necessary? With these 4 principles, the court felt more confident in determining the status of the death penalty. 4 years after Furman's case, another case was presented to the court, Gregg versus Georgia. Troy Gregg was convicted of murder, but claimed the death penalty unconstitutional. This allowed the court to use their new principles and vote once again to determine if the death penalty was unconstitutional. Then vote was 7-2. The court held that a punishment of death did not violate the 8th and 14th Amendments under all circumstances. In extreme criminal cases, such as when a defendant has been convicted of deliberately killing another, the careful and judicious use of the death penalty may be appropriate if carefully employed. And the death sentence was revived. Justice Potter Stewart, when summarizing the majority opinion, states, in the 4 years since Furman versus Georgia, at least 35 states have enacted new statutes providing for the death penalty. These are carefully drafted statutes ensure sentencing authority is given adequate information and guidance. Therefore, it is a completely legal punishment for a criminal who has committed a capital offense. Just like society, our government is evolving and making changes to improve common decency. The death penalty has gone through many changes to the point where it is only used with the utmost consideration and carefulness. Of course, life is precious for both the criminal and the victim. However, I have no idea what it is like to have your life permanently destroyed or taken by a criminal. This does not just include murder. There are many different crimes that can change one's life. In Kenedy versus Louisiana, Patrick Kenedy raped his 8-year-old stepdaughter. Louisiana laws had allowed the death penalty to be used during the cases that involved the raping of a child under the age of 12. Kenedy claimed that since there was no death intended, it was a cruel and unusual punishment. This brought the case to the Supreme Court, where they decided to remove his death sentence. Even though there was no murder involved, one could argue her life was taken a different way. Just knowing that the person who has caused you harm was still alive can be horrifying. Although the example in this case was not about a murder victim and their loved ones, the same can be said of their situation. Knowing that the person who robbed you of a precious life is still alive can be worse than just outright killing them. With this in mind, I ask of you, what is wrong with using the death penalty when a criminal definitely deserves it? What makes it right to allow a life that has harmed maybe 1, 10, or even 100 others the right to the opportunity for rehabilitation? Why can't we just continue to improve the death penalty in ways that benefit society and decency?
Okay, so I'd like to start off with saying that the opposition brought up that it creates a warning for criminals, and I just wanted to ask what evidence you had that it actually deters crime and future crime. And I would also like to bring up the fact that the death penalty system in the U.S. is applied in an unfair and unjust manner against people largely dependent on how much money they have, the skill of their attorneys, the race of the victim, and where the crime took place. People of color are far more likely to be executed than white people. The death penalty discriminates against people with less money and against people of color. 14th Amendment states that no one must deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. People of color have accounted for a disproportionate 43% of total executions since 1976, and 55% of those are currently awaiting execution. Though this might seem like a small margin, the U.S. is made up of 76.6% of Caucasian people alone, and only 13.4% of African American people. Another question I'd like to ask the opposing side is if you believe that people should receive the death penalty because it is a harsher punishment, then would it not be harder for the person to live with what they have done in prison? And I would also like to ask the opposing side if you've considered the psychological impact that the death penalty would have on individuals involved in a case. The Capital Jury Project interviewed 1,200 jurors from 353 capital trials in 14 states and found that 81% of female jurors and 18% of male jurors regretted their decisions.
30 seconds.
And 62% of female jurors and 37% of male jurors sought counseling after the trial. And this has a huge impact on everyone involved in the case. And I hope you guys consider that.
The Fifth Amendment states, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." The late Justice Anton Scalia has asserted that the Supreme Court cannot declare the death penalty unconstitutional in the 2015 court case Glossop v. Gross. The court voted 5-4, and Anton Scalia wrote that the Constitution expressly contemplates the death penalty when it considers the possibility that someone may be deprived of life, and therefore, capital punishment cannot be unconstitutional. The arguments that it is arbitrary and unreliable and therefore cruel deal with the concerns about conviction, not the punishment itself, and are dangers inherent in the jury trial process. This means that since the punishment itself and the dangers are inherent in the jury trial process, this means that since the court handles the death penalty with extreme consideration, it cannot be called unconstitutional. While it may be true that killing people may be a hindrance to society, these aren't just bad people. Being given the death penalty means you are the worst of the worst. I argue that keeping them alive is the real hindrance to society's growth. The death penalty is not coming to an end, no matter what our government needs our capital punishment. As society continues to improve, our judicial system will continue to improve our capital punishment as well. I would also like to counter something that the opposition said. Actually, the death penalty for people to be on death row costs $90,000 per year. The average time that someone has spent on the death row is 15 years. If you do the math, which I did, it is more, if you don't want the death penalty, then the alternative is life in prison. Life in prison is anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 a year. The average lifespan of a male is 74 years. The average age that someone goes into the death penalty, onto death row, is 20 to 30. So that's 50 years. 50 times $30,000 is more than 15 times $90,000.
Closing statements. You have 1 minute.
As rates of capital punishment decline, so should America's support of it. Studies show that fewer than 50% of Americans believe the death penalty is fair. It is an irrevocable decision in an already broken system. By killing as punishment, the death penalty serves to mimic and remind America of its haunting past involving lynching and relates a message to Americans that killing is justified as long as the government is the one doing it. How can we justify the hypocrisy of using the crime committed as the punishment in return? The justification often used for the death penalty is that it will deter criminals and lower the crime rate, but this has not been proven to be true, and the constant debates about the use of the death penalty only serve to distract Congress and state legislatures from focusing on real solutions to crime issues in America. What we need is a proper trial and processing of the convict and to sentence them to life without parole, where they are forced to live with the awful decisions they made and are unable to commit any further crimes. The death penalty models the behavior that it seeks to prevent, and we cannot continue to justify and practice it because no one should have the right to deprive someone of their own life.
Also, studies have shown that cases without the death penalty cost $740,000, while cases where the death penalty is cost $126 million. So it's almost double.
You guys get an extra 10 seconds.
Maybe the death penalty isn't needed in our judicial system, but there have to be punishments equal to crimes committed. You wouldn't give a convenience store robber the death sentence, so why would you give him a mass murderer prison time? Retributive justice is an idea that holds that the best response to a crime is a punishment proportional to the offense. Retribution is different from revenge because retributive justice is directed only at wrongs, has inherent limits, is not personal, and involves no pleasure at the suffering of others. The death penalty is meant to serve as not just a punishment, it's a warning and a deterrent. The deterrent theory for the death penalty talks about how if there was no capital punishment, the amount of murder and other criminal offenses would increase due to the punishment that discourages criminals from committing them, not being present in the judicial system. Since the Eighth Amendment limits the kinds of punishments that we can execute, the death penalty has acted as the highest and worst punishment. So once again, maybe the death penalty is unnecessary, but our government needs a capital punishment, and I do not believe a lifetime in prison is enough.
Final debate for this second period deals with abortion. And the resolution reads as follows. Laws restricting a woman's right to choose abortion passed outside the boundaries of Roe v. Wade are unconstitutional and immoral or unethical.
To restrict women's rights in any sense is unethical, extremely outdated, and has proven to be unconstitutional. In terms of abortion, women to this day still have to fight for their rights over their bodies, especially now as new restrictive laws are being proposed in many states. We argue that restricting these constitutional given rights is not okay under any circumstance, and what a woman decides to do with her body is no one's decision but her own. Since 1973, the Supreme Court has upheld the woman's right to privacy, which, protected by the 14th Amendment, gave the mother full jurisdiction over her unborn child. Planned Parenthood versus Casey then attempted to change this, but by no means did they succeed in denying a woman's right to abortion. Abortion is not a new practice. In fact, it's not even something that was just introduced in the last couple centuries. The first ever recorded evidence of an abortion dates all the way back to 1550 BC from the Egyptian Ebers.
The only difference between abortions performed legally and illegally is that when the women's rights are restricted, they will still have the abortion, just in an extremely unsafe and risky manner, putting the woman's health and life at risk. We are not only looking out for the rights of women, but for their safety as well. The opposing team would like us to believe that each state has the ability to make laws restricting women's rights in terms of abortion, because they are representing the community or legislators in their state. However, the individual's rights overrule that claim because they are protected by the 14th Amendment. When ethics are brought into question on this topic, it should be obvious that a woman has the moral rights over her body. If legalized abortion is eliminated, then the law will be used to force women to carry pregnancies to term,
30 seconds.
which is putting the women's bodies under the control of the government, thus violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. How is it ethical to choose a group of developing cells over an already developed life with goals and commitments? It is not. By restricting abortion, a woman's freedom to choose what is best for herself is overlooked, and this has been proven to be morally, ethically, and constitutionally wrong.
Our standing is that laws limiting a woman's right to choose abortion passed outside the boundaries of Roe v. Wade are constitutional, moral, and ethical. Those boundaries are that an abortion is allowed throughout the entirety of pregnancy, but states may allow regulations within the second and third trimesters. Further cases, such as Planned Parenthood v. Casey, have allowed Roe v. Wade to remain standing, but have also added further regulations, such as having a minor inform her parents before having an abortion, which takes into account the other people affected by the procedure's occurrence. This case, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, is already an example of something outside the aforementioned boundaries of Roe v. Wade, and so the restrictions added in that case show that the addition of further limitations are indeed constitutional. There are many conflicting views on abortion as a whole, and when addressing this topic, it is essential to not only address the main concerns about the procedure itself, but also the conflict between the rights and safety of all involved. Throughout history, anti-abortion laws have not always been about the rights of the unborn child, but instead about protecting the life of the mother from an incredibly dangerous procedure. Now, with modern medicine, the procedure is arguably safer. So, since the mother's right to safety is guaranteed, society is able to shift the focus to the safety and rights of others involved. Limitations on abortion are not an attempt to violate the right to privacy of women. They are an attempt to protect the life and liberty of unborn children and to ensure abortion is as humane as possible in the circumstance that it must be used. Before continuing, it is also necessary to clarify that this debate is not about whether or not abortion is right. It is about the boundaries of Roe v. Wade and whether laws passed outside of it are constitutionally and morally sound, and we argue that such laws can be both.
Before abortion was legal, it was men that had the choice whether or not a woman could have an abortion. This tore apart women's pride and privacy, forcing them to go in front of a male review board and get permission from a board of all strangers who could never possibly understand her situation in order to get an abortion. This is a humiliation that no woman should have to face. Women need to have power over their bodies and a right to decide what is right for themselves. January 2nd, 1973 is a landmark day in history when women were given the right to have a say over their bodies. This case was between Jane Roe, a 21-year-old pregnant woman representing all women wanting or needing abortions but could not get them safely and legally. She was fighting against Henry Wade, a Texas attorney general defending a law which made abortions illegal. These laws made it a crime to obtain or attempt an abortion except on medical advice to save the life of the mother. She claimed that abortion law in Texas violated her constitutional rights and the rights of other women. She won the case in a 7-2 ruling, and the court granted the right to privacy under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees a woman's right to an abortion. This decision held that a woman could choose abortion in the first trimester of pregnancy without any legal restrictions. During the second and third trimester, further restrictions went to the state. However, the states are now placing unlawful restrictions, like closing down clinics, making them very inaccessible and near impossible for them to have access to this right. Why would we backtrack in history, resorting to unsafe and risky methods? New advancements in science and technology have made abortions safer than ever. Restrictions would not only be unconstitutional, but would be very counterproductive, as women would still have abortions just in more unsafe ways. As technology has advanced, so should our rights.
An additional case we looked into is the Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt that took place in 2016. The state of Texas was seeking to impose strenuous burdens on the state's abortion clinics despite evidence that showed that the provisions undermined women's health. Multiple provisions were considered under Texas law, and they were imposed medically unnecessary regulations on doctors and faculties that provided abortions. One required doctors performing abortions to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of the clinic. The other required abortion clinics to meet the standards for an ambulatory surgical center. While on the surface these laws may sound like they aim to protect women's health, medical experts say that these laws are unnecessary because abortion is an incredibly safe procedure. These provisions were thankfully struck down by the Supreme Court, but had a profound effect on Texas. Before the restrictions went into effect, the state had more than 40 clinics that provided abortion services. After, there were only 10 clinics left in the state with 5.4 million women of reproductive age. When these requirements took effect, only few faculties were open, which is in and of itself a substantial burden on women seeking abortions, because the remaining faculties could not meet the demand. Not to mention, only women that had enough money to get the procedure were able to get the procedure done. It was a disadvantage, to say the least, for the women who could not afford an abortion. Making it more difficult to have abortions will not prevent them from having it, and just puts their health at risk.
You guys still have 30 seconds. If you want it.
The new restrictions that are being proposed are stepping inside the Roe versus Wade bounds, such as, like I mentioned before, closing down the clinics and making them inaccessible. So this is violating a woman's constitutional right under the 14th Amendment, protecting her privacy.
Opposition, you have 4 minutes.
Firstly, the boundaries of Roe v. Wade are outdated. The court disagreed with Roe's claim of a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy in any way during the entirety of the pregnancy, and in an attempt to balance out values, decided that states may impose regulations within the second and third semesters. Since the case in 1973, substantial medical advancements have been made in all fields. This could be viewed as sufficient evidence that laws passed outside the bounds of Roe v. Wade are constitutional because they can be created in accordance with modern medical knowledge. This would ensure abortions are performed in a manner that is safer for the pregnant woman and as humane as possible for the fetus.
Another important case is that of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. This case revolved around amendments to Pennsylvania abortion laws that required a minor to gain the consent of their parents and a married woman to notify her husband before aborting a fetus. The court ruled 5-4 in favor of Planned Parenthood, but upheld all the provisions except for the husband's notification. To decide this, the court put the provisions through the undue burden test. To fail this test, a provision would have to severely limit a woman's ability to obtain an abortion. The court decided that they have passed. This case is already an example of something outside the aforementioned boundaries of Roe versus Wade, and so the restrictions added and show that the additional of further restrictions on abortion laws are indeed constitutional.
Okay. Humans have thought what's right and what's wrong in this life. A statistics done at the Baylor University by a philosopher named Francis G. Beckwith showed that the majority of Americans see abortion as morally wrong. And the statistics show that morally wrong, the percentage was 49% of the U.S. people think that it's wrong, 23% show that the moral is not an issue, and 50% think that is morally acceptable. Women before any procedure know that what they're doing is practically wrong, and at very last, this is irregular behavior. But also, the majority of them consider the moral wrong. Humans are taking innocent lives away and not considering that that's an actual life affirmation and part of them. I'm not saying that abortion is, in case of a health situation, I'm not saying that this is in a health situation is bad, but like we don't have to ban abortion at all. We asked for limitations to only apply to those that lives are on risk. And just the moral aspect of thinking that having an abortion is right because the fetus is not a baby just justified. It's just not justified. Women sometimes just take this abortion type of they take this as like a game because they keep having abortions and they using this process as like a method of birth control. So then I ask my opponents, when do you consider something alive?
You guys have 30 seconds if you want.
Historically, a fetus has never, or rarely never, been considered a human being, at least not before quickening, an old-fashioned term indicating noticeable movement in the fetus. The Catholic Church even allowed abortion until quickening, up until 1869. Further, a wide variety of laws throughout the world were written specifically to protect born human beings and their property. There is virtually no legal precedent applying such laws to fetuses. Even when abortion was illegal, it had a lesser punishment than for murder, and was even just a misdemeanor found by the courts. This anti-choice view of fetuses as human beings is therefore a new and peculiar one. With such historical and legal precedent, no such historical legal precedent to back it up. Planned Parenthood versus Casey was not found to be outside Roe versus Wade, additionally. It simply placed expanded detail concerning specific abortion law that was not provided in the Roe versus Wade case. Casey does not infringe upon the trimester system put in place by Roe versus Wade.
Something else that the opposed team brought up is that through restricting their rights, they are looking out for the woman's safety. However, laws have never stopped abortion, but only made it unsafe for women. Although having an abortion does have a large toll on a woman's body and emotional health, having the baby when not ready is argued to be even more mentally and physically traumatizing. Most women keep the baby, end up dropping out of school, and the alternative possibility of giving the baby up for adoption is a very hard choice to make, especially as the adoption system does have many flaws.
30 seconds.
Also, the risk of dying from childbirth is 13 times that for an early abortion, and the overall abortion complication rate is extremely low, about 25 times lower than for childbirth. Legalizing abortion has had a good impact on the health of American women by giving them a safer way to terminate their pregnancies.
You argue that the laws outside the boundaries of Roe v. Wade are infringing on a woman's right to privacy. And we can partially concede this point, as some laws created by radical anti-abortion individuals could aim to stop abortion altogether. However, if the case itself was revisited and decisions updated and revised, the boundaries could be redone in a manner that is less vague, allowing for less radical influence, and instead refocusing on public safety. Also, as Judge Rehnquist noticed in his dissenting opinion on Roe v. Wade, that the right to abortion does not appear to relate to the normal usage of privacy, much as you would not call purchasing something at a store a private matter. This comparison is not to lessen the severity of the procedure itself, only to note that it is a transaction. It is more so a liberty issue than a privacy issue, and, quote, that liberty is not guaranteed absolutely against deprivation, only against deprivation without due process of law, unquote. Which would mean that the government has the ability to take said liberty away if they follow the law accordingly. The case of Planned Parenthood v. Casey is an example of a time in which this liberty has been considered by the court, and they have found that more restrictions can be added.
You say that abortion is not an issue of one person's rights over another, because a fetus is not alive and therefore does not have human rights. This point is not necessarily proven, as the starting certificate of life is largely up to personal interpretation. A fetus could be seen as alive as soon as sperm meets egg, because it is when DNA is formed, and a human will be created according to that DNA. It could not be considered alive when there is a heartbeat around it. It could be considered alive when there is a heartbeat around 6 to 8 weeks, or when the fetus is viable, meaning it could live outside of the womb. Until the Supreme Court comes to a decision that clearly defines the point where life begins by law, you cannot say that a fetus is not alive, and therefore does not have rights. This is especially important because at approximately 24 weeks, the fetus reaches viability. Laws such as the one currently under fire in Kentucky seek to limit abortions after a fetal or heartbeat is detected at 6 to 8 weeks.
Closing statements. You have 1 minute.
As all of us have previously stated, abortion is a choice that the woman should be given and is not to be restricted by the state government. This sensitive topic is no different than women's rights cases of the past. No individual should be restricted of their choices or have obstacles put in place by them, by legislators. Throughout history, abortion has always existed, legalized or not, safe or unsafe, and it will continue to exist. Whether or not we will make this safe and legal for women in our nation is the question.
30 seconds.
To be pro-choice does not mean to be pro-abortion. Creating laws outside Roe v. Wade, restricting abortion makes the decision to have a safe abortion more difficult, if not impossible. It is our civic and constitutional duty to make sure women are provided with a solid support system and safe choice. A choice that may not be easy, but a choice regardless.
10 seconds.
We stand here today not as pro-abortion advocates, but as pro-choice, to protect the rights and privacy of women who choose to get an abortion if that is what they decide is best for themselves. Women who want to terminate a pregnancy should have the choice to do so.
Imposing laws that limit and regulate abortions are completely constitutional and moral when those laws are created in accordance with modern medical advancements. Roe v. Wade is outdated after over 40 years, and the medical field has advanced as a whole. The Casey case shows constitutional examples of restrictions to abortion and showed that limitations that are considered outside the bounds of Roe v. Wade can indeed be constitutional. Even only 10 years after Roe v. Wade, revisions were made to the case to modernize it, so why not do so after 40 years? Limitations on abortion that are modernized would not seek to make the procedure inaccessible, but would instead ensure the safety of the woman and help make abortion more humane.
All right, civics folks, make sure you total up. We got a few minutes. Does anybody have questions or comments from what you heard? Any of the debates, content-wise or otherwise? Curiosities?